things. Bangers in the chat. Bangers in the chat for that banger of an intro. Oh, sorry, folks. It has been a little while since we came on here and did a stream. I was
AIDS.
unfortunately laid to rest because of AIDS. I got the AIDS, and it sucks. Don't get AIDS. That's my recommendation for you. You don't even have to get very far into today's show to get my recommendation of the day, which is don't get AIDS.
Don't get AIDS.
Oh man, it's been a very long time since I've been this sick. I this is yeah, I just turned 35. I'm kind of confronting older people than me are going to roll their eyes at me just the same way I do when I roll my eyes at people younger than me when they talk like this. But you just got to give me my minute here. I'm confronting my mortality more and more every day. Being 35 and now being as close to 50 as I am to 20, I'm starting to realize, I'm not getting any younger. I'm starting to feel the years behind me in a way that I haven't before. And this sickness is probably the first time really that I've ever actually been like starting to kind of visualize what it would be like to like die of a disease. That's kind of what I've been like laying here in bed trying to sleep and just wheezing. I've got like gunk in my lungs and sitting here just contemplating like what if this is what it feels like to die? Like what if I'm actually dying now? I'm 35. Maybe I've got congestive heart failure and I didn't know it.
Yeah, you're getting up there, man.
Yeah. I'm just
Days are
50 is
winding
right around the
down.
corner, which means 70 isn't far away. So, you know, I'm getting pretty
90
close to
is
life
just-
expectancy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So today is basically the first day that I've really been super functional, and Cooper and I were both keenly missing we were feeling the absence of having not come out here and talk to you guys. So we wanted to come out and talk to you guys. I don't know how long my voice is going to last, so we're going to get through as much of this as we can. I was talking to Cooper before we went live, and then I was talking to another person before that for a while, and then I was talking to Cooper before that for a while. I don't know how long my voice is going to keep up, but we'll do what we can. Kyle says I haven't completed my transformation into Randall Carlson yet. I was just going through some old pictures on my phone yesterday, and one of the pictures I saw was when Jason Stapleton messaged Amy and I and said, "Hey, Amy, I don't know if you realized it yet, but you married Randall, like a younger version of Randall Carlson," and he just sent a picture of Randall Carlson looking all Space Santa like, and one of the finest compliments I've ever been given. I think I can't think of many people that would be better to be compared to than the Space Santa himself.
Are you a Freemason?
I could be. Depends how much money you want to give me.
You're going to get excommunicated.
Oh. Well, I was going to say, I guess it'd have to be a lot of money then. Just going to make the sign of the cross here and repent of the bad jokes that come to my mind. All right, there's cough number one. What's up, Brody Alexander in the chat? So speaking of Brody Alexander, we actually got to speak to the man himself on a King Pilled voice chat the other night, and I guess now it was probably further away than the other night. The last week has kind of been a blur for me, but talk to the guy. Brody has the most epic Canadian accent I've ever heard. It is fantastic.
He's from Canada?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll leave it at that. We don't want to dox him any further than that. But yeah, your dad is Canadian. How do you feel about that?
What if he was from like I don't know, like New Mexico, but had that accent somehow?
That would be confusing.
Yeah.
He says, thanks, A Bud. He says, "Is it okay? I put my name and face online. I'm from Cowtown, baby." Yeah, okay, yeah. It's from Alberta. So I don't know if you've ever it's Alberta accent. It's pretty similar to like Minnesota. Minnesota, eh? Yeah, sure, you betcha.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my
Sven
neighbor's
and
from
Oli jokes.
Minnesota.
Yeah. Anywho, how are you, Cooper?
I'm okay. I heard that the Pope is gay, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not the only one. So we'll jump into that. So for those of you who I guess maybe have been under a rock or whatever, um, one of the big so I look at our audience, the audience of people that the channels that other people watch that also watch our channel, and it's overwhelmingly let's see, there's Two Bit Podcast, there's David Gornowski, there's Buck, and then there's Jim Bob, Cotel, and Jay Dyer. Those are that's the swath of our audience, which is I'd say it's a pretty good group of people to be talking to. So I don't imagine that there's really anybody out there, really a lot of people in the audience who don't. I guess the people in our audience who really care about the goings on of the Catholic Church and the nitty gritties of the doctrinal statements and that sort of thing. They, oh no way, Pastor T.D. Jakes got outed as a power bottom.
I don't know who that is.
That is a visual. Oh, hold on. Oh my. Here, we're gonna share the screen here so you can see T.D. Jakes. There's T.D. Jakes for you.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Apparently he got outed as a power bottom. That's a new one. Stop sharing. So anyways, so there's not really a lot of people I think in our audience who like they're I don't think they're going to come here for the doctrinal breakdown of everything. If for those of you who really care about the goings on of the Catholic Church,
We're not that kind of channel.
No, we're just this is not our thing. And those of you, like I said, with the people from the other shows you guys watch, you guys have plenty of other resources to go for that sort of thing. Really, we just wanted to use this as an opportunity to, number one, laugh at Michael Lofton, because the dude on December 15, Michael Lofton comes out with his new line of merch. He posts a picture of himself, all like pimped out and everything, wearing a shirt. It's a black shirt with a white text, and it just says Pope Splainer. So he's leaning into the meme. He identifies himself as the Pope Splainer, and then like 2 or 3 days later, the Pope stirs up all of this this hullabaloo with respect to blessing same-sex unions, and the guy who just self-identified as the Pope Splainer now has to try to tie himself into knots to say that it's no. You see, he's blessing the individuals. He's not blessing the unions themselves. He's blessing the people who are in the union. And
The
that's
document was
different.
perfectly clear. It's all of you who don't understand it. I'm the only one who gets it. Perfectly clear.
In fact, it was brilliant the way that it was just covered everything that you would want to have it cover. It just
Everything
it
you
was
could
well
want,
written.
you could possibly want. It's really good, very good.
It was so well written that you need me to come and explain to you how well written it was.
Yeah, because you're all dumb.
Right.
It was so well written that nobody on the planet understood it correctly.
Right.
But me.
And I'm very friendly. I feel very friendly toward our Catholic brothers and sisters, much more than I used to. So growing up, Cooper, I think feels the same way. We both grew up very ardently anti-Catholic, or being in a culture that was very ardently anti-Catholic,
Yeah.
And the process of coming into Orthodoxy made us see Roman Catholicism in a new light. I'm very keenly aware of the differentiations between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, and I think those differentiations are valid, and there's a reason why I'm Orthodox and not Catholic. But I have very much come to see Catholics as something closer to like estranged brothers than like outright hostile enemies. The way that I used to see them that way. Now this is speaking for like the rank and file. The institution itself, I have no love lost for whatsoever, and I well, there was an interesting thought here that I wanted to bring up. A good friend of ours, Josiah, has dropped this in a couple places. Now, Josiah is Cooper's avowed mortal enemy, or he's one of them. Who's a bigger enemy of yours, Kyle or Josiah?
Oh, Josiah, no doubt.
Okay, is he the mortal enemy? Like, is there anyone who's worse?
Well, I'm thinking of how many mortal enemies I have, and
you've got a lot.
He might be at the top of the list.
Wow, he's special. That big fucking Neanderthal.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, shout out to Josiah, Cooper's #1 mortal enemy. He had a really interesting thought, and I thought I wanted to share it with more people because I think it's kind of interesting to ponder.
I already have a feeling I'm going to hate this.
You've already heard it. The first time he brought it up, was in the King Pilled voice chat, and
did I start spurging out?
You started spurging out like immediately.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And then so did someone else. I don't want to dox him because I know he doesn't like to be doxed, but there was someone else there, probably the type of person who would spurg out about something Josiah said with respect to the Roman Catholic Church. You could probably put two and two together. If you guys want to, we're talking a lot about the King Pilled voice chat because we have a lot of fun in there. If you guys want to join us, subscribestar.com/kingpilled. Join up. It's only $10. Don't worry about the other tiers right now. You can sign up if you want to pay more for whatever reason. Go for it. But right now, if you pay $10, then when we end up re-releasing it at whatever point we relaunch the group here, we've gotten a little delayed. But when we relaunch it, you'll get grandfathered in. So if you want to go sign up, then we'd love to have you in there. I might even, depending on how I'm feeling tonight, might even try to do a voice chat later this evening. Anyways. So this is what Josiah said. He said, in the same way that Christ's human soul was separated from his human body, his church has separated east from west. So part of the way
my blood's already boiling. I'm already angry.
So part of the way that when he elaborated on this when we were talking is he said, so he's speaking of this kind of in like symbolic terms. So you have the Western or the Roman Church, that what side does it err on? It errs on the side of being overly material, overly scholastic, and like overly Aristotelian. And then you have the Eastern side, which, if you could say that there's an excess within the Eastern side, it wouldn't be that the Eastern side is like too materialist, or it would be that it errs on the side of mysticism or being too detached from the world. And so he's using this kind of illustratively. So he's saying that in a sense, if you're thinking about it symbolically, it's kind of like taking the stereotypes of the two sides here. You have the mystical side, which is kind of like the soul, and you have the material side, which is kind of like the body. So when Christ died, his body was separated from his soul, because that's what death is. So he says, as Satan once thought he had captured Jesus, whose body was buried in death, so too the world thinks it has captured Rome, and it may even appear to be the case. Perspective limited by time isn't a whole picture. So in essence, what he's saying is, so for anybody who doesn't know the doctrine of the harrowing of Hades, Jesus died, his soul was separated from his body. So there was
For
a
anyone who
period of
doesn't know,
time.
Matt is the designated translator from Josiah because nothing that guy says makes sense.
Yeah, right. For whatever reason, I can understand it. Yeah, there we go. I was waiting for that in the comments.
Yep.
So
I'm with you, buddy.
there's three. So you have the Christ dies. His soul is separated from his body. He goes and he harrows Hades. And the way that it's been, I don't remember which church father, if it was a specific father who said this or if it's kind of an agglomerated perspective, but one of the ways that I've heard it depicted or talked about before is that essentially the devils received Jesus's body thinking they were getting a human body, and it was kind of like, surprise. They thought that they were getting a human body, and they wound up with the Son of God. And so, but there's a period of time there where Jesus, if you would have gone and you would have looked at Jesus' body laying in the tomb, you would have seen his physical body laying there dead. Meanwhile, his soul was harrowing Hades. Obviously, speaking of these sorts of things in time limited terms is going to be, we have to exercise a lot of grace with each other with some of these kinds of conversations, because clearly you can't constrain some of these things by time. But from our perspective, from the human perspective, Jesus' body is laying there, and it looks like his body is dead. And for 3 days, people are mourning the fact that he's dead and gone. So in that way, Josiah is saying there's an analogy here where if you're, so the great schism happened in 1054, so it's been 1,000 years. From the perspective of the Orthodox Church, for 1,000 years, the Rome has fallen. Rome has been taken in by the devils. They think that they've received the body of Christ in the form of the Roman Church. And at the same time, you have the Eastern Church, which is alive and well from the Orthodox perspective again. So on a future time horizon, it is not inconceivable to see a reunification of his body and his soul, so to speak, symbolically speaking. And the big dilemma here is that there is a very real ecumenical movement that wants to reunify the church under false pretenses. But I think that
This analogy drives me insane. I understand he's making an analogy.
Go ahead.
But like, the East is the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, I agree.
So that's why the analogy I think doesn't work, because you're like, oh, the body and the soul separated, and the West is the body, and it's like, no, the body is the East.
Yeah, it's not saying that that's why it's an analogy. That's why it's not.
Yes, I understand. It's just a. I love you, Josiah, but you got to do better. Be better. Be better.
Josiah, you need to come up with analogies that don't trigger the autism so much. That's the issue here.
Yep.
It's not that there's anything wrong with the analogy. It's just that it triggers the autism.
No, there is something wrong with the analogy. That's what I just said.
It's an analogy. So an analogy doesn't have to be a one-to-one correspondence.
Okay. Whatever. Moving on.
That's all you got? Oh, I just got the black lady snap. Every time Cooper and I connect, he always sits here and snaps, like trying to get his mic to test his mic. So I've started, every time we connect, I'll just sit here and snap at him. Yeah, the comments don't like the analogy either. See, I think that it's I took the what do you call it? Jordan Peterson's Big Five personality test. And I think I was like 98% on 98%
Jew lover.
Yeah. I I was like 98% openness. So like my default state is being very open and receptive to things. And I like stuff that makes me think. And his analogy made me think. So understanding that it's an analogy, then it doesn't pose a problem for me. I don't have a problem differentiating between the truth of the Orthodox Church being the body of Christ and also recognizing the potential truth of this analogy. Like I would love to see
And my
Roman
agreeableness was
Catholics,
like first percentile or something like that.
uh-huh. Yeah.
So
My agreeableness is pretty
not gonna
low,
win
too.
me
I don't
over.
remember what it was though. I think that there's, I guess where I like seeing this happen with the gay pope, seeing all this stuff going on doesn't make me happy. Like I don't like it's fun to make fun of guys like Lofton and to watch the really insufferable Catholics squirm over it.
Yeah.
And it's good to like I like the fact that this sort of thing happening means it's going to drive people back toward the Orthodox Church because it's going to happen. Not like everybody is going to, but definitely more people are going to become Orthodox because of this sort of thing happening. So in that sense, I like seeing it. But I mean, there's no question that this sort of thing pains the heart of God. To have the church split in 1054 pains the heart of God. God wants to see the church reunited. And I'm not saying that under ecumenical terms. I'm saying that to have the church truly reunited as the church would be a great and glorious thing. And in some manner of speaking, it's going to happen someday. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like or exactly what the steps are going to be between now and then. But so I guess maybe 5-something years ago, something like this happening would have actually made me I would have been like exultant, kind of. I've been like, yeah, that's right. Screw the stupid Catholics and their dumb pope. But now it just kind of like I've got relatives who are Catholics who are very devout, and I know this sort of thing really pains them. And I've got a much deeper appreciation for the church. So I don't know. Those are just some of the thoughts that were on my mind with respect to that. Let me see some of the comments here. Would you have a problem with the analogy of the Trinity being water, steam, and ice? Of course, people take analogies and run with them. No, I wouldn't have a problem with that analogy. Like,
I do.
Like sun being used as an analogy for the Trinity, sunlight. There's no problem with that.
I have a problem with that analogy because it seems to imply modalism. The sunlight one's a much better analogy.
Yeah. Some analogies are better than others, but I don't think that the point hinges on the analogy. Like if you suspend disbelief and say, yes, it's an analogy, so it's going to fall apart at some point, then saying the analogy falls apart at some point doesn't do anything for me. It just
but I have autism.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, right. Yeah, I got a discount for the autism.
Thank you.
One thing that I did want to share was this. So to see where this is going to be taken, and this here is the point where I make the appeal to wayward Roman Catholics. I know you guys, I know that you know that this sort of thing is out there. I know I'm not saying anything new to you, but this is not going to end well. You can see very clearly the direction that this is going. So this is James Martin, who's obviously, or not, I guess not obviously, he's a Jesuit.
What is he, a priest, a bishop, a monk? What is he?
Yeah, he's a priest, I think.
Okay.
He's Father James Martin is what he's referred to as. I haven't seen anybody referring to him as a bishop. So right after this whole thing was released and Lofton is squirming around trying to count the number of angels dancing on the head of a pin over this thing about blessing unions. You have Father James Martin who comes out here and says straight up he's blessing the union. So he's honored to bless his friends Jason and Damien this morning in our Jesuit residence, according to the new guidelines laid out by the Vatican for same-sex couples.
Frickin' Jesuits.
But before this, I've been blessed by their friendship and support. So this is Jason, theology professor at St. Joseph University, New York. He lives with his husband, Damien. His research and advocacy focused on LGBTQ Catholic ministry. He is a gay Catholic theologian and assistant teaching professor of religious studies at St. Joseph's University in New York. So they were married at Judson Memorial Church. Here's one of the many weird photos from the Instagram of this church. This guy doesn't seem to be a big fan of Pope Benedict or Pope to Catholics, St. John Paul II. One of the things he wrote was, since hearing of his death, I've imagined Joseph Ratzinger sitting in a heavenly classroom where his teachers are queer martyrs and saints.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of them.
Here's a picture of, he posted on Instagram of Sinead O'Connor tearing up the picture of Pope, to him, St. John Paul II. And he said, fight the real enemy, R.I.P. Sinead O'Connor. And then compared the Time magazine covers of Pope John Paul II and Taylor Swift. He said, she's wearing the hell out of that jacket. He wrote Theology of the Body. This is an upgrade. So this is the guy that Father James Martin is blessing. It gets worse though. I'm not going to open these pictures up because you don't need to see them. That couple that he's blessing, this is them at a gay nude beach. They're not nude because they posted these pictures on Instagram where he liked them. He's liked pictures of them kissing each other. Gross. They dress in drag. This is the couple that he chose to do his first blessing of a same-sex couple with. This is the direction that things are going to continue going with the Catholic Church. I mean, now I'm not.
Loud? How loud am I?
You seem fine to me.
Okay, whatever.
I think the humility point here would be, the humble point here would be that it's just a matter of time before we start seeing this thing within the Orthodox Church. It's already beginning to happen on a smaller scale. It's going to continue to build. This sort of pressure is going to continue to build. And I guess, I don't know. I just want people to be prepared for it. I want you guys to be ready for it and not to have your faith shaken when it happens, because there's no question that it's going to happen. Things are going to get better, but they're going to get worse before they do. So, yeah, this is part of the reason why I'm not going to tap dance on Michael Lofton's grave too much. Like, because he's Michael Lofton, he earns a decent amount of it. But at the end of the day, like, there's going to be a time where if I'm making fun of Catholics for their Pope endorsing something like this, then someone within the Orthodox Church is going to turn around and do something like this, and we're going to have to own it at that point.
Well,
so.
You had what's the bishop of the Greek Archdiocese?
Elpidophorus.
Yeah, Elpidophoros.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pronounce it? I don't know how you pronounce it.
I don't know. You're
It's
probably
crazy
more
Greek.
right than I am.
I don't know these Greek names.
Yeah,
They're not even real names.
it's not even a real country.
Yeah. He had that whole baptizing that, was it like two men purchased a child and they got it baptized?
Yeah, I think it was something like that, or they might have adopted the child. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so they purchased a child.
Well, yeah, I was thinking adopted versus what is it? Where they have a womb servant grow the kid for them.
Oh yeah, witchcraft. You mean?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Surrogacy.
I just saw your comment, Cable, there. Cooper's right, but now he's got to be kicked off the show. He disagreed with the host. The OGs will get that one. Uh, anyways, so that was the first thing that we figured we kind of had to talk about that because that was in the news here recently.
Godparent? They're wait. A random username is saying they were godparents, not their kid. Okay, so you have a homosexual couple that's allegedly the godparents of a child.
Okay, so it was
That sounds right.
okay. Yeah. So they
It wasn't.
got the kid. It was the kid's baptism, and they were the godparents for the kid's baptism. Is that what it was?
Something like that.
Yeah.
In any case, yeah, there'll probably
Now,
be more of that.
If I'm not mistaken, he got like censured for that, didn't he? Didn't the archdiocese respond to it, or
I don't know. I don't know what happened because I don't really pay attention to things outside of the diocese I'm in.
right?
I know a lot of people were upset by it, but then I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of subversive types who are really lauding it as well.
Right. And here,
I
I guess
don't know.
it would be worth saying here, because we've talked about this before, but this is probably one of those things where you and I have talked about it so much that we kind of take it for granted. But this perspective may not be as common outside the two of us. Part of the reason why that sort of thing happening within the church doesn't, like, I'm not up on all the details of it, and I don't really know, like, the guy, I don't know how to pronounce the guy's name, but it doesn't really matter to me because it's not my responsibility to police my bishop. My
And especially not somebody
and not
else's
someone
bishop.
else's bishop, right? So, this is part of the role of an Orthodox Christian within the church. Is sure, like, there's some utility in understanding these sorts of things and being aware of them and knowing that they're happening, but it's not my role to go police the behavior of my bishop, much less somebody else's bishop. God's responsible for policing the behavior of the bishop. If he's a bishop, then he bears
Well, what about the
spiritual
time where Pope Saint Celestine lauded the parishioners in Constantinople when Nestorius was preaching heresy and they left? What about that, Matt? Spurg.
Right. That's not prescriptive for every single Orthodox Christian with respect to the bishop. It would just be nonsense for that to be the case. If there's a case where your bishop is openly preaching heresy, then your responsibility isn't to follow him into heresy. You're going to be held responsible if you do follow him into heresy. At the same time, your responsibility is to obey him. So, someone else's bishop doesn't mean anything to me. It's
Oh
of
yeah,
no
but what
concern
about
to
the
me.
one time when? I'm just kidding. But so are you saying that if your bishop starts preaching heresy, you, out of obedience, are required to follow him into heresy?
No, I just said the opposite of that.
Oh, okay.
You're not required to follow him into heresy, because you will be, if you follow him into heresy, you're going to be judged for following him into heresy.
Uh-huh.
But you'll also be judged if you are rebelling against his authority. So this is it's a what was the
I don't
thing
know
that
about
Father
that.
Stephen DeYoung said the other day?
I don't know about that. I mean, maybe we're doing the thing that we don't like, which is arguing theology. But Saint Ignatius of Antioch says that you'll be judged if you follow your bishop into heresy.
Right. But then,
So in other words, you should not follow your bishop into heresy.
yeah, you should not follow your bishop into heresy. At the same time, I think it was it Saint Gabriel who said that if your spiritual father tells you to sin, you should obey him.
No, that was Saint Sophrony. No,
Okay,
no, Saint Silouan. Saint Silouan.
Saint Silouan. Oh, yeah. It was Saint Silouan. Yeah. So how do you balance these things?
Listen to your priest.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And honestly, like, to me, it's kind of it's a relief. I don't say that to say that it's like, oh, well, the pressure's off of me, but it's like these are things that are outside of my control. I don't need to control them. I'm going to be held responsible for the decisions that I make. And my responsibility is to operate within the domain of responsibility I've been given, not to go outside of that. You know, like if you think of the church hierarchy as like a bunch of nodes, there's nodes on this hierarchy, and if you get someone on a certain level of the hierarchy that steps outside where like that node goes offline because they're like out of whack, then if you have a bunch of other people who try to step outside their responsibility to fill in for that person, now instead of having one node on the hierarchy out of whack, you've got a bunch of nodes all out of whack. And the hierarchy is even worse. To have a stable hierarchy, people have to be responsible for the things that they're responsible for. And if you're exceptional at being responsible for the things within your particular domain, then you'll find yourself elevated within the hierarchy naturally. This holds within the church and within hierarchies outside the church as well, because they're all part of the same model. Your responsibility is to take care of the domain that's been entrusted to you and to respect the people who are in authority above you. This is why St. Paul says to obey the governing authorities. They've been put in positions of power by God, and they're going to be held responsible for the decisions that they make. Now, that doesn't mean that you, like, I don't know how anarchists or like libertarians get this somehow turned around in their head to where like St. Paul says to obey the governing authorities, but then they say like nobody should be governing authorities. Like, the governing authorities are going to exist, and St. Paul says to obey them. So it would naturally follow from that putting yourself in a position to become one of them would be a legitimate track for a Christian. St. Paul was traveling to Rome to go convert Nero. He wanted the emperor to be a Christian. I don't think that he was going to go say, hey, Nero, become a Christian and then resign as emperor. He was saying, become a Christian so we have a Christian emperor. So to have, this kind of goes back to the conversation we were having the other day about Red Caesar, that in order to have the rise of strong, powerful, authoritative Christian leaders at the social level, it has to start on the personal level. You have to begin manifesting that spirit into the world. You have to have strong, powerful, authoritative Christian leaders establishing themselves in their day-to-day lives on a personal level. And the more that they do that, the more they will begin to manifest this on a social level, both in like a spiritual sense and also just in like a natural financial social structural sense. Were you about to say something?
No, just getting some blood flow into my ass cheeks.
I noticed that you gave up on the ASMR pretty quick.
No, I was muting while I was chewing.
Oh, okay. He was gonna give you guys the experience of listening to him eat pretzels.
No. It was corn chips and salsa, of which I did
chips.
eat this
Oh,
entire
okay.
jar. You
Well
know,
done.
my mother-in-law made this, and she wrote on the lid that it's spicy salsa. You see, her tolerance for spicy things is basically non-existent. Like a tiny bit of black pepper, and she'll be like sweating and need like a gallon of milk. So when I read spicy, I was not expecting it to be very spicy, and I was correct. It was not very spicy. In fact, it was not spicy at all. But I'm sure it would have given her a heart attack.
Did she make it special for you?
No, she probably just put like a little bit of pepper in it and was like, I'm giving this to Cooper because I don't want
Do you like
this."
spicy food?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, are you like the more spice the better?
Yeah, generally, up to a point. Up to a point where, like, when you get to the point where you're not actually tasting anything, it's just like hot.
Like your tongue goes numb.
yeah. Like that. What's the point? But
My
like,
big issue
yeah,
is the spicy stuff usually gives me heartburn. Like I like the way it tastes. It doesn't bother my mouth, but I get heartburn from it afterwards.
I don't. I've had heartburn maybe like twice in my life. So
Oh, you were a fortunate man.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other big subject of late is the news about Trump and the state of Colorado removing, or the Supreme Court for the state of Colorado ruling that he is ineligible under the 14th Amendment to be on the ballot for the presidential election. And so it's going to go to the Supreme Court. And my initial instinct is I would be absolutely shocked to see the Supreme Court not strike it down. However, I have learned my lesson from the events following 2020. And I thought that there was no way that the Supreme Court was going to deny the case on a basis of lack of standing back then. I thought that I underestimated the resilience of the system to be able to accommodate something like that. I thought that the Supreme Court turning that down would have been a lot more catastrophic than it actually was. So in this case here, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Supreme Court just sidestep it. That's basically what they did before. I'm not married to one outcome or the other. I'm basically like, I'm sitting here with popcorn. I think it's fascinating. It's great we get to live in wild times. Honestly, I kind of I guess the inner anarchist or accelerationist in me kind of wants to see the Supreme Court say, yeah, we're not touching it. You guys deal with it yourselves. Part of me kind of wants to see that because I want to see. It seems like it would be more interesting than just having the Supreme Court say, no, he has to be on it, and we just kind of it proceeds with the election as normal. Shortly after this, the obvious thing happened. There's people who were like freaking out about this, but I was like, how did you not see this? Like, this is transparently exactly what's going to happen. How is this a surprise and a shock to you? It was the lieutenant governor of California issued like a memo or whatever and basically told the California government that they need to explore every possible legal means of removing Trump from the ballot in California on the basis of the Colorado ruling. And which I thought was it was interesting to me that it was as bald-faced as that, where she's literally just said, she literally used the terms like explore every legal means possible of removing him. The other funny thing was part of it, she said, like at the end of that statement, she said, it is that the Constitution is clear. In order to be eligible to be the president, you have to be at least 40 years old and have not engaged in violence against the government or something like that. And
she's never read that thing.
I was even surprised that they would make that fundamental and basic of a factual error, like 40 years old instead of 35 years old. Like these sorts of statements, they get proofread by people. There's multiple people that put this, that it passes in front of, and somehow not a single one of them caught. Like you learned this very early on in school, and especially when these people were growing up. Like the chick's probably in her 40s or 50s. So she definitely would have learned very early on in school that you have to be 35 to be president.
Could you imagine, Matt? Look at you. You're 35.
Yeah, I guess I'm eligible to be president. Yeah.
Do you think I've just lived my whole life with presidents who are like a million years old. So the idea of somebody your age being president is like, I can't even conceive of that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a horrible idea.
Oh yeah, it does.
Well, now with our modern stock, maybe, 60, 70 years ago, 35-year-old men were,
So JFK was the youngest. He was 43 when he was elected. So JFK was 8 years older than I am now. Damn. Interesting. The lieutenant governor of California is Greek Orthodox. That I did not know.
So is Tom Hanks.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Because his wife is Greek, and I think
Oh,
when
I
he
did
got
know
married
that.
to her, he converted. But he eats
Okay.
babies and stuff. So
Um, random username says constitutionally the state runs the elections. 2020 SCOTUS already said the same thing again by rejecting to hear Texas versus Pennsylvania. Yeah, in this case, it's a little different than that. I'm going to read a couple different threads here that I found interesting on the subject. He says Lieutenant Governor of Texas is talking about removing Biden from the ballot now for the same logic. Only hope SCOTUS gets involved is if the right strikes the left. Um, I think there's some truth to that, and actually one of the threads touches on that. So, real quick here. Okay, so let me share the screen. Jarvis, where is this? There it is. Okay. So this guy is
BRB.
Okay. This guy's from the like what would you call it? It's like the circle of Twitter that is like Baseball Crank, Dan McLaughlin, and Red Stees and John Gabriel. So they're like young conservatarians, kind of. They're mostly Gen Xers. A lot of them are lawyers and stuff. He's in that whole circle. He's a lawyer in Colorado. So he said he did a quick thread on this after reading the entire ruling or the statement and all the dissents and everything from the Colorado court. What's up, disgruntled docs? And so he gave his opinion on it. So he says there's 5 judicial opinions out of Colorado on this Trump ballot thing: the trial court opinion, the Supreme Court majority opinion, and 3 Supreme Court dissenting opinions. None of the opinions agree with each other, except maybe the dissenting opinions of Chief Justice Boatwright and Justice Birkenkotter. The most compelling and, in my view, correct decision was the dissent from Justice Samur. Justice Samur reached holdings that none of the other 4 groups did. He examined the issues with the depth and close examination of the case law that is most like how SCOTUS does it. I think SCOTUS will reverse the decision of the Colorado Supreme Court and will largely follow the dissent of Justice Samur. I think the SCOTUS decision will be either 9-0 or 7-2. When the SCOTUS does so, I'll remind you of this tweet and gloat. There will be no dealing with me after that. He says, before we get to Justice Samur, first some background on the Colorado Supreme Court. They're not typically a deeply divided or partisan court. They're all Democrats, and they were all appointed by Democrat governors with similar liberal/libertarian leanings. We get a lot of unanimous opinions. Divisions, when they occur, are typically respectful and intellectually honest, no vitriol. I thought this was interesting as a background because I don't know diddly shit about the Colorado Supreme Court. I was surprised that this case was a 4-3 opinion, and even more surprised at how sloppy the majority opinion was. Knowing that SCOTUS absolutely has to take this case, I figured they would write something stronger. Well, this here, I could see very well this being the conservative, always underestimating just how deranged the regime is willing to behave. In other words, he's making the same mistake that I made in 2020, where I was like, there's no way that the Supreme Court's not going to take this case. They're going to have to. And I just underestimated the will to be able to just say, nope, and just have everything just continue as is. It's like in anticipation, you're like, expecting that the majority opinion, you're like, well, no, there's no way that they could actually have this be 4-3. It's just so unreasonable to actually fall on this. Well, then the court actually makes this super unreasonable decision that happens to really benefit Democrats. And then people go, wow, I can't believe how sloppy that majority opinion was. Well, yeah, now it's the majority opinion, and it's sloppy, and you can complain about it being sloppy all you want, but that doesn't change the fact that that is what the opinion was. One more tweet about Justice Samur before we get to the law stuff. He was born and raised in El Salvador, but fled the country at the age of 13 due to the risk of civil war. Not necessarily relevant, but maybe it is. Okay, on to the law stuff. So the guy who, just to make it clear, this Justice Samur he's talking about is a Democrat, appointed by a Democrat, who grew up in El Salvador and fled the country at 13 due to the risk of civil war. He says this case is about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Passed in the aftermath of the Civil War, Section 3 says that insurrectionists cannot hold certain offices. The trial court held that Section 3 did not apply to the president, and the trial court might be right. Justice Samur did not need to resolve that issue, though. And he's got the text of Section 3 for the 14th Amendment, which says, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, that's the key phrase right there, as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So just remember this phrase, or as an officer of the United States, because we'll come back to that later on. Because of Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, that section says, hey, you know the whole insurrection thing we just talked about? How is this supposed to work? Who gets to decide who engaged in an insurrection? What sort of standard of proof applies? Is it a civil trial or a criminal trial? Is it a judge or a jury or someone else who decides that a particular person engaged in insurrection and therefore disqualified? What if they're already appointed? Do they still get paid while the proceedings are going on? The 14th Amendment doesn't answer any of these questions. Instead, Section 5 says that Congress gets to pass legislation to give enforcement power to carry out Section 3. And Congress did just that. Justice Samur points out that in 1870, Congress passed a law that allowed for both civil and criminal enforcement of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This law was then repealed and replaced in 1948. And he gives the text of the law here. I'm not going to read it right now. 1948, Congress replaced the 1870 statute with a criminal insurrection law. If convicted under that statute, with full criminal due process afforded the defendant, one of the punishments is to be banned from holding office in the United States. Trump has not been charged under this statute. So I'll say here, well, that I don't know if that's necessarily is still in question. You know, if he's not been charged under the statute and they need him to be charged under the statute in order to apply this, then, you know, perhaps he gets charged under that statute. So he says, Congress and only Congress gets to pass legislation enforcing Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Congress did so, and it chose to enact a criminal statute that bars anyone convicted under it from holding any office in the U.S. Trump has not been charged or convicted under that statute, therefore Trump can appear on the ballot. That's pretty much it. There is case law backing up all of this analysis. Justice Samur engaged in a lengthy discussion of Griffin's case, but I'll let you read that for yourself. I predict that SCOTUS will heavily cite Griffin's case in its decision reversing Colorado. This analysis renders a lot of the other questions irrelevant. Did Trump engage in insurrection? Does Section 3 apply to the president? Should Trump be off the ballot nationwide or just in states like Colorado that found that he engaged in insurrection? None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that Congress followed the 14th Amendment and established a procedure for barring someone from office for engaging in an insurrection, and that procedure was not followed here. He says, all right, back to pornography. So now this is very much an example of the conservative impulse to say, look, there's a particular procedure for this, and they didn't follow that particular procedure, so they're not allowed to do the thing, which can be very easily hand-waved away. This is where you get the conservatives who stand athwart history yelling stop, and history just rolls on without them. I think it's entirely plausible that that's how this proceeds, and whenever the Supreme Court either denies to take up the case or they take it up and they affirm it, then he's going to point back to this and say, how can they do this? They can't do that. There's a procedural thing they didn't check this particular box before they went about it. And it's like, yeah, the frickin' decision's made already, man. Like, all you're doing is just getting the legal rigmarole put into place to get the outcome that we want. And if it's not there, then we're just going to just rubber stamp it and pass it on through. This is exactly what happened in 2020. And I wouldn't be shocked to see them attempt that same thing here.
Yeah, they're just going to do it anyway.
Now, what's interesting about that is that is going to be a major, major black pill for this type of guy. And this type of guy is very key to the continued functioning of the system. The Gen X, like probably a fairly seasoned lawyer who's, classically liberal, who, like, these are the National Review guys. These are the guys who these guys are basically kind of like the sinews that are holding everything together. When these guys get blackpilled, when they check out of the system, that's when the system is going to really transform into something else. So I think this is interesting to watch for this reason, to see just how brazen they're going to be. Because I think from a legal perspective, to the extent that there are still lawyers who want to do law and respect the history of law, because there's still plenty of those people out there. I think most of the justices on the Supreme Court see themselves that way. They see themselves as people who want to do serious law. And what he's pointing out is very like legitimate from a history of case law perspective. So to the extent that people still want to be a serious civilization and do actual law, to just ramrod this on through would be a pretty significant matter. And that's going to be very blackpilling to the type of guy who, like, this guy's not a Trump guy. I think he's probably a DeSantis guy. So I'm kind of rooting for the Supreme Court to just refuse to even entertain it, just to see what it does to the minds of these sorts of guys. That's going to be a big, like, here's what time it is sort of moment for those guys. And these are, like, I'm saying guys a lot. These are the guys that have the hardest time seeing what time it is.
Yeah.
So for a slightly different perspective, I mentioned that thing about the office of the or officers, presidents being, what was the specific phrasing back here? It said, as an officer of the United States. So that's one of the things that he mentioned, that the point that Justice Samore was making, it renders this conversation irrelevant, because to summarize it again, what this justice's dissenting opinion is that, well, there's a specific protocol that you undertake to convict someone of an insurrection, and that protocol was not followed. So it just, the whole question is moot. If there wasn't a protocol existing, then we could establish a new one, but there is an existing protocol, so that question is moot. That's what he's saying this guy's case, or this guy's opinion is. But in one of the other arguments is about this phrase here, as an officer of the United States. So let me stop sharing here and share this one. So this guy said, so he's sharing an article from Slate. Larry Lessig, no Trump fan, thinks the Colorado decision is garbage. Quoting from the article, it says, if that court is to preserve its integrity, it must unanimously reject the Colorado Supreme Court's judgment, because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not apply to Donald Trump. He says the crux of Lessig's argument is that Section 3 doesn't, can't, and shouldn't apply to the president and vice president, because otherwise Joe Biden wouldn't make the ballot in any red state, and that's the end of the republic. So this is an interesting, if we assume that the Colorado ruling stands.
I hope that happens.
Then
let's just nuke it all, man.
Here's a potential downstream effect of that. And this is what Random Username just mentioned a minute ago. So now reading from the article. Law professor Kurt Lash has shown that the crafting
What's that Civil War movie that's coming out?
Yeah, right.
Is this how this happens?
This could be how it happens, yeah. So law professor Kurt Lash has shown that the crafting of Section 3 to omit the president was not an oversight. As his work shows, an earlier draft of the clause expressly mentioned the president. That mention was removed, and many digital trees have been felled to address a related issue, whether the president is properly described as occupying an office of the United States. At best, that work is ambiguous, though the Colorado Supreme Court made a strong argument that the president is. So part of what's being debated here is, when it says an officer of the United States, what is an officer? What can be considered an officer? And my understanding is that it's generally been held that officers are appointed to their position, not elected. If you're elected, you're something different. An officer would be someone who was appointed by the president, for example. So someone like that, if they had engaged in insurrection, then they wouldn't be eligible. But as a president, you're not considered an officer. That's one of the legal positions here. But what is not ambiguous, back to the text here, But what is not ambiguous is whether it would be absurd to exclude the president from the reach of Section 3, because it is plainly not absurd. Indeed, excluding the president and vice president from the scope of the clause makes perfect sense. Lash argues that it could make sense because the framers of that clause likely expected it to apply to Civil War insurrectionists alone. No one, he argues, feared an insurrectionist presidential candidate after 1865. What they feared was insurrectionists in Congress. Other parts of the 14th Amendment are plausibly read as targeting the Civil War alone. This clause, on that understanding, could be so read as well. One thing I'd like to just point out here is it's fascinating when you start reading about the history of law and if you read legal opinions and the way that law is treated and everything, the extent to which it is all a matter of opinion and consensus. I mean, like judges' rulings are referred to as opinions. This isn't like, like a voice from God inscribed on a rock. And most people relate to law as being, in some sense, some sort of like objective thing, but it's entirely subjective. Especially when you start listening, they'll read into things like these other parts of the 14th Amendment are plausibly read as targeting the Civil War alone, so we're going to use that frame of mind to interpret and understand this part, that this might be just targeting the Civil War as well. This sort of inference and opinion and everything, like this is all that law is based upon in its practice. So if it's just based upon opinion and interpretation and consensus, that should be a big signal to you that it's ultimately just power. It's just rooted in power. You can have all the nice words you want on the page. The power and who wields the power is what matters. Back to the text here. But even if one assumes that Section 3 was meant to be prospective, so looking forward, there is an obvious reason why the only 2 nationally elected officers would be excluded from its reach. It took mere moments after the Colorado Supreme Court's ruling to see why, as Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick threatened to remove Joe Biden from the Texas ballot as retribution. You see, with every other officer excluded under the provision, the state official or state court affecting that exclusion would feel the political costs of their decision alone. If the Missouri Secretary of State decides that Josh Hawley was an insurrectionist, for both advancing a plainly illegal theory under which Congress could reverse the electoral votes of Pennsylvania and for rallying the rioters on January 6th with his now infamous salute, then Missouri and its voters will bear the political costs of that decision alone. Its act would not impose a cost on other states. But if state officials from blue states can remove red state candidates, or vice versa, that state bears no cost. Instead, it gains a political victory. In the language of economics, the decision imposes an externality on the nation, which is exactly the kind of decision that states alone should not be making for other states. Such behavior is obvious to lead to a tit for tat and a breakdown of our entire electoral system.
Sweet. Sign me up.
All right, so now that everybody listening has a gigantic boner, I think this whole thing is fascinating. I'm definitely going to follow this, keep track of it, watch what's happening, and I don't really have a dog in the fight. Like what's the worst that's going to happen? It's just going to turn into just a normal presidential election, and it's going to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, and someone's going to get elected, and the difference. Okay, whatever. The world's going to go on. On one hand, things continue as per usual and we go about our lives. And on the other hand, things get really interesting. But this is definitely an issue, obviously, that strikes right at the heart of the founding principles of the nation.
Our democracy.
Mm-hmm. And federalism. And objectively, like from a historical perspective, like looking back 100 years, people could look back now and be like, wow, that's like a really interesting time to live through. There's a lot of really interesting historical stuff. Like if you were reading about this if this has happened in the past and you were reading about it, it'd be a pretty interesting thing to be a student of the history of Donald Trump's America or whatever. All right. Well, I don't think, well, there's one other thing here that, let's see. An hour. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, we'll get into this here. This will be interesting. Just for history nerds. So Tom Elliott did a pretty interesting thread here on the story of the 14th Amendment. And so he said the 14th Amendment has always been intended to empower Washington to lord over states, although even its authors never intended for it to go as far as it has. With federal judges over the last 100 years having decided it actually enables them to nullify state laws they dislike. After the Civil War, Lincoln's Republican Party controlled Congress, in large part due to federal officers arresting anyone speaking on behalf of Democrats. And seeking to adopt the 14th Amendment, they prevented Southern states' congressional representation unless they ratified the 14th Amendment. Despite being blackmailed, every Southern state except Tennessee voted against the 14th Amendment. Congress responded by passing the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which established a comprehensive military dictatorship to run the governments of each of the 10 states that were not yet back in the United States. Quoting from Thomas DiLorenzo's must-read book, The Real Lincoln. That is a very good book. I read it back in my ardent libertarian days, and it's funny having I tweeted something about this the other day. I went from being a typical neocon, whatever, growing up and being like, oh, Abraham Lincoln, to being an ANCAP and being like, oh, Abraham Lincoln, to now being kind of like, Abraham Lincoln? Yeah, I mean, like,
it's all right.
Like one of the, yeah, like he persecuted journalists.
Journalists, yeah.
Yeah,
It's not too bad.
He went after the New York Times. He did some pretty good stuff. I kind of like being kind of cured of my
the war of northern
obsession.
aggression.
Yeah, being kind of cured of my obsession with decentralization has made me have a deeper appreciation for these sort of authoritarian figures. I understand their vision a little bit more now that I'm not, essentially a commie. And that's part of the problem is that, and this is where, I live in Texas, so I have to be careful saying this sort of thing. And I deeply appreciate my Southern brothers, and I hold just as much contempt as they do for Yankees. I feel their pain. At the same time, the biggest issue with the South was that they were kind of commies. That was the entire like Jefferson would have been a huge fan of Lenin. The two of them would have gotten along very well. There wasn't you can have your heritage, and I appreciate that, and that's great and everything, but the entire political project of the South was essentially just a precursor for communism. So, yeah, Brody says Baptist commies. So like in hindsight, it's like, yeah, you guys lost, and you inevitably were going to. Like, it was just, it's a shame that it happened that way, and the Yankees are probably worse, but now they're definitely worse. Yankees are definitely worse than Southerners, and I love Southern culture, and I would have much rather have lived in the South than in the North at the time. But yeah, it's kind of a no good guys sort of a thing from my perspective in hindsight. Anyways, so but it is very interesting to look back and read this book by Thomas DiLorenzo, where he depicts what happened throughout Reconstruction, because that's something that very conveniently we weren't taught a lot growing up. Exactly what happened. Everything is kind of just delivered in glowing terms, and emphasizing all the stuff about slavery and so basically anything was justifiable because slavery. But from like a military history sort of way, like studying the way that a conquering army can completely subjugate and stomp the life out of an occupied territory and then incorporate that territory and establish a government that is built on the subjugation of it, and that whole thing, that's very much what happened with the Reconstruction era. So this stuff is all very interesting to me. So ending these military dictatorships was conditional upon states ratifying the 14th Amendment, which makes sense. This is how, if your goal is to instantiate the power of your government, and you have these rebellious vassal states, then yeah, you're going to get them by the balls and force them to sign on to the legislation that you want. And if they do, then you'll use the carrot instead of the stick. During this time, the Union prevented anyone affiliated with the Confederacy from registering to vote, even those who bought Confederacy bonds or donated food and clothing to former soldiers. Indeed, in order to be allowed to vote, Southerners were required to publicly pledge their allegiance for the Federal Army. Meanwhile, a great number of tax dollars were spent registering ex-slaves as voters and coaching them to vote Republican. Blacks in the North, meanwhile, were still prevented from voting. The federal military dictatorships running southern states removed state and municipal officials whenever they acted out of lockstep with the Republican Party, replacing them with efficient Union, i.e., Republican Party men. After several years of this, southern states' new puppet governments finally voted to ratify the 14th Amendment. But here's where it gets interesting. Having witnessed all this tyrannical behavior from Republicans, New Jersey and Ohio voted to revoke their previous ratifications of the 14th Amendment. Congress needs 3/4 of states to ratify an amendment, but was never able to secure enough support from the requisite 28 states. Only 20 states voted to ratify it outright. No matter, Congress simply passed a joint resolution proclaiming the 14th Amendment ratified. In short, the 14th Amendment has never actually been officially ratified. So I think this is very instructive for what's happening right now. We go back to that other thread, the guy's talking about, there's this procedural thing, and they didn't follow the procedural thing, so this whole thing has to be unwound. Here, there's a procedural thing where they're adding a fucking amendment to the Constitution, and they can't get 3/4 of the states to do it, so Congress just says,
do it.
It's ratified. We'll just say it is. We'll just say it is and act like it is.
All right.
Good enough.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Lose another war to us? That's right.
Right, yeah, right. He says, and yet it's been used to completely invert the entire nature of our Constitution, transposing the United States from a decentralized federal republic into a highly centralized nation state. As odious as the 14th Amendment is, it was never intended to give federal judges the power to strike down state laws they claim violate the Bill of Rights, which applies not to states but to the federal government. Otherwise, the ratifiers would have had to also repeal the 10th and 11th Amendments. I guess writing everything down on paper and expecting it to just work out doesn't work out. I mean, don't know what to tell you, man. For decades, the Supreme Court upheld this view that the 14th Amendment never incorporated the Bill of Rights on states. See, for example, the slaughterhouse cases. But during the progressive era, federal judges began reimagining the amendment to give them almost total power over states. Imagine that. And unfortunately, that view has dominated for the last century, which, as I've explained elsewhere, is the source of almost all of the division currently destroying the United States. So all we have to do is we just have to overturn a century of precedent, go in the anti-progressive direction, and go back and ratify the 14th. So they go back and they ratify the 14th Amendment, and then they accept everything that comes after it. That's all they would do if you were going to force them to do that. So honestly, it's kind of, it's almost like they're doing us a favor. They're not going to drag us through the whole political rigmarole to just get the same exact outcome in the long run anyways. The 14th Amendment has always been about subjugation. That it's now being used to rob Americans of their choice of a presidential candidate is in keeping with its sordid history. Okay. So that I shared that. Oh, this is why. So, oh man. One of the things that's really annoying about Twitter now is they have this show more, but you have to actually click the thing to open it. So then you have to go back a whole bunch of times if you're trying to get back to an original quote tweet. All right. So Nate Fisher here, I thought this is a valuable observation. He said, a reminder that the 1789 Constitution was supplanted long ago. America has had several constitutions. This is a very Moldbuggian observation. Just as Augustus went to great lengths to show continuity with the Roman Republic, successive American regimes have made a show of continuity with the original Constitution, unlike the French, who unapologetically numbered their different republics. But we shouldn't mistake the fact that these were nonetheless radical changes to the form and substance of government. And with respect to the subject about the 14th Amendment was never ratified, and we've just existed with it being ratified, and so then maybe we just it's never been ratified, so we have to undo all the stuff that's been built on that precedent. Baseball Crank, who is, I think he's right when he says this. He's a kind of a goofball conservative, National Review conservative, but with respect to that, he said that that's not going to challenge the ratification of the 14th Amendment is never going to fly because we've treated it as binding law for 155 years. And so Nate Fisher said the current SCOTUS won't reverse 155 years of precedent, but it could be a reasonable way for a successor regime to substantially change the operative constitution without an amendment while staying formally within the procedural bounds of the founding constitution. This is thinking more Machiavellianly. But this is the key point. Obvious, as with Lincoln, this won't be a question of law, but of power. In order to even begin to do something like this, it's going to require power. And that's not something that the right wing is very close to being able to exercise right now. So yeah, I think that was basically all that I had. I had another thread about economic stuff, but I'm starting to lose my voice. I can feel it, so we should probably get wrapping here. Thank you guys for showing up. Appreciate all of you. It's almost Christmas. I think we'll try to do another show between. So Christmas is Monday. We'll try to do another show between now and then.
TD Jake is a homosexual.
Yeah, apparently he's a power bottom.
Yeah.
Let me see these comments. Okay, I didn't miss anything. All right. Well, thank you guys. Sorry for the somewhat scatterbrained show today. My brain feels like moldy oatmeal, and my voice is headed down the tubes. So please like, share. You know the YouTube stuff. Like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled. Follow Cooper at Cooper Brooks. And come join us in the King Pilled voice chat. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to do the voice chat tonight, but if I'm not talking nonstop, then it might be a little bit better. So I'll try and hop on there a little bit later. Subscribestar.com/KingPilled. We'd love to see you guys in there. We've got a good group of people. And yeah, we appreciate all of you. Anything you want to say, Cooper? Deuces.